Welcome to Brave Dynamics. This is your host, Jeremy Au. Leadership is harder than it looks. As a proven founder and Harvard MBA, I interview courageous entrepreneurs, executives, and investors every week. I also share my frontline experiences, coaching insights, and own professional development journey. If you're stepping up as a new leader, founding a startup, or venturing into the great unknown, this is the podcast for you. Hey, Ricky, good to have you on board the show. You've been an interesting person who has been a very active founder in the Southeast Asia tech scene. You've been bootstrapping, which is a path that not many Southeast Asians are taking, to be honest. So I think there's an interesting journey to feature. And you've also recently launched your own podcast. And so I'm happy to dive into your journey.
Sounds good. So where do you want me to begin?
Tell us about yourself. Where did you grow up? And then we'll go into your professional career along the way.
So I'm actually Indonesian. So I see a lot of Indonesian here. Hi, guys. Nice seeing Indonesian faces and names here on Clubhouse. I grew up in Medan, very conservative Chinese-Indonesian family. And the family is always wanted the kids. So I have three younger brothers. I'm the eldest. They always wanted us to study overseas, make the family proud, all those sort of Asian things that parents expect their kids, to achieve. And when I was 14, I was lucky enough to move to Singapore, and I studied there for about 4 years before I moved to Australia. And I have always had this dream of being an entrepreneur when I actually moved to Australia. I think a big part of it was actually inspired by my parents. So my dad is a hustler. He works really hard. He runs a few companies when I was growing up. So seeing him always thinking about new ideas, building his business has always been very inspirational for me. So that is something that's ingrained in me since I was a kid. So when I was in Australia doing my uni, I was already thinking of doing business. But I knew as well, I think deep down that I had a lot of skills to pick up. I had a lot of things I want to learn. And I knew that, there are a lot of things that I don't know how to do yet. So I was also trying to be very prudent in my way of approaching entrepreneurship at that age. Having said that, I actually started a bar when I was in Melbourne with whatever money I scrounged up from working at Starbucks as a barista. You can imagine, it didn't go well, this kid who's in university running a bar. But that was my first venture. And then I graduated, and then I started working for a company, a research company. I always wanted to be a consultant, but what I got was a research analyst role, which was, for me, it was still exciting. And then after about 2-3 years working there, I decided that, Melbourne, Australia is a great place to live, but it's not the most exciting place for someone who wants to, experience new things, meet a lot of different people, look at how different businesses are built. I feel like it's lacking some excitement there. So I moved to Singapore and joined a conglomerate. Actually, it's a Vietnamese conglomerate where I was helping them building their first business in Myanmar. So got a lot of exposure into the Southeast Asian ecosystem and understanding how some of these conglomerates and big rich families built their fortunes, which was a bit of an interesting insight for me as well. I went into consulting after that for 3 years. That is a company called BTS. That's where I learned a lot about leadership, because we do a lot of people leadership, people development kind of projects at BTS, and I enjoyed my time thoroughly there. And I think after BTS, the itch of starting, and by the way, during this entire process, I've started a bunch of random things as well, but I'm not going to go into too much details because they didn't go so well, and we can talk a little bit about it, Jeremy, if you're interested. But yeah, I started a bunch of things during this process. But yeah, I think after BTS, I think I felt that I really wanted to I feel confident. I feel more confident. I really wanted to get back onto the entrepreneurship route. And I knew deep down during this entire time of me building my career that there are a few things that I need as a person, as an individual, to really help me be successful as an entrepreneur, right? So I think on the back of my mind, one of the biggest things as the eldest in the family as well, I feel like I do need to have a bit of financial stability for myself, and knowing that the journey of entrepreneurship is going to be full of up and downs, and you don't know what you're going to encounter, you don't know when you're going to need money. I wanted to make sure that as much as possible, I was able to weather my personal financial needs, at least for the next 1, 2 to 3 years, right? So I actually saved quite a bit for that. And as a side note as well, I think as the eldest in the family. I think the reason why that was kind of important for me as well is because at that point, I think my youngest brothers, I think were still in university, and I was still helping them pay their tuition fee. So I think there is some sort of a burden there that I knew I needed to, make sure I have in place before I can comfortably and confidently, take on a more risky, I guess, career in my life, right? And then, yeah, that's when I started Ravenry, which was inspired by my first job as a research analyst. We started the business as an on-demand research platform that basically answers any questions for any businesses in 24 hours, right? So that was kind of like how we started. And we've pivoted quite a bit. It's been 2.5 years now. So right now we are focused more on building a network of vetted talents, mostly in the research and writing space right now, and connecting this network to people that need their service. So that's what we do now.
Amazing. I mean, I love that, grad arc of not just your story, obviously as a professional and founder, but of course as a very Southeast Asian, right? Kind of like, growing up in so many different countries and, being able to access different markets is something that it's actually a common feature, I think, for so many Southeast Asians, right? Which is something that global cosmopolitan point of view isn't really replicated in many other places as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, Southeast Asia in itself, it's quite fragmented, right? There's so many different kinds of cultures, people, beliefs, mindsets that you can find. Even within my city in Medan, I've seen so many different families having a very different approach to living their lives. So yeah, definitely.
So Ricky, I'm just kind of curious. What was it like growing up with a father who was entrepreneurial? What was inspiring about it?
There's a few things. I think one is my dad was a bit of a workaholic. So when I was growing up, at least now he's taking things a little bit more slowly, which is good. I think one thing that caught my attention when I was a kid was how determined he is to give us a good life. I think that was kind of very inspiring. And I think it's not just my dad. I think my mom, she wasn't an entrepreneur, but she was doing a huge part. She was again, this is very Indonesian, right? Growing up, I go to 4 tuitions. I take Chinese classes, of which knowledge I've given back to the teachers. I do guitar, I swim, I have math class outside of school, things like that, right? So my mom is always bringing 4 kids in a giant van, driving us around with food in the car, and making sure that we are well fed and we are changed and we are clean from one tuition to the next tuition. She basically lived in a van for the most part of me growing up, right? So I think that was also kind of a very left a big imprint. So my mom also someone that I really, really, really look up to. But I think back to my dad, I think he actually I think a lot of Asians in Southeast Asia, when they go through, especially my age, right? You lived through 1997, which is the Asian financial crisis. My dad's business was hit really, really hard during this time. And I think at that point, I was about 9 years old, 8 years old. Yeah. And I think when I knew, I think that my family was in financial trouble, as a kid, I didn't know anything, right? But my dad, I could see my dad was pulling his hair, trying to figure out what's the next thing he can do, because his first business did not survive, and trying to figure out how to make sure he can make ends meet for us. I think that resilience, that active effort in trying to give us a better life was something that's truly inspiring for me. And he did it all for us. He didn't he didn't worry about being rich. He didn't want to get the fame or anything like that. He just wanted us to have a good life. And I think that was very important for me.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And one thing that's interesting about what you said as well, how everything is, the Asian financial crisis, right? I mean, my dad was also in business and he got massively hit by Asian financial crisis and he was super stressed. And like you, as a kid, I had no idea what was going on. All I knew is that my dad was very frustrated, and then suddenly he was very free, and spending a lot of time at home, right? And you're like, wow, your dad's home all the time. That's new, which is great, but then he's not very happy, right? So
I would just say there was a few really important moment in my childhood during this time that I recall until today. I don't think I even told my brothers about this, but I recall my mom having to open our personal safe at home and having to sell her jewelry just to pay our school fees. That was that was like something that, I'll never forget. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing. I think there's some similar dynamics as well, where, we had to dip into our savings to basically like get it. I mean, it's crazy, right? Because I think there's so many Southeast Asians who tackle and face the same, Asian financial crisis, right? I mean, you threw out the business people, you threw out the employees, and it was just a crazy, I don't know, macro shock that, it's just like seared into the minds of like, every, I don't know, executive today, I guess, in Southeast Asia, but also like for our generation, right? Watching our parents deal with that nightmare.
Yeah.
So, I think obviously, you learned a lot and, you started being entrepreneurial. I'd love to, talk about your first ever entrepreneurial experience, right? Or at least officially was like setting up the bar, right? So tell us more about this bar that you set up in Australia. Like, what was the idea? What was your idea? Yeah.
Okay. So I'll rewind a few years back. It's not a business that I started, but it was kind of like an entrepreneurial thing that I did when I was a kid. So I actually used to sell just sketches to like this was me when I was in primary school. I consider this my very first entrepreneurial experience. So I used to trace. I get a trace paper and I'll trace like comic books and like all these Marvel characters, like the Japanese anime characters like Doraemon. I'll just trace them on the trace paper and I'll sell that trace paper to my friends for money. I remember so clearly when I was a kid, and I think this was the same time as well, Asian financial crisis. I think I was trying to like help my parents somehow, but we were like I was getting like 5 cents for every single piece of paper that I sold, and I was basically conning all my friends to buying like this piece of paper that I traced from a comic book that I didn't even own. I think I went to a bookshop and I just traced like a bunch of like characters, on comic books, and I tried to make money out of it. So that was, I would say, like one of the first things that I did that I still remember until today to make money, right? I think my first official job was also quite interesting. I was actually in Singapore. I was 16, I think. I wasn't sure if it was legal, but I was actually hired to be a salesperson for a company that sells air purifier door to door. So I wasn't paid a dime. I was working there for 3 months. I wasn't paid a dime, and I had to carry an actual air purifier. It was like 4 or 5 kilo, walk down every single door along Holland Village in Singapore, knock on the door, and try to sell a random person an air purifier. So that was kind of like one of my, again, like it's not a business, but I feel like it was a very important entrepreneurial, like self-building, self-development moment for me, right? It was kind of like dealing with rejections. It was talking about like, how to, pitch yourself, how to appeal to people, how to have a thick skin, all those stuff, right? And the 3 months, I only sold literally one air purifier. And remember, I was only paid like $500 as a commission for that, but it was kind of like something that again like left a very big it was kind of like a huge learning moment for me as an entrepreneur now. Now back to the bar question. So in Melbourne, obviously, like, I think Melbourne is a huge F&B city. Like people there are very creative with what they do, and so young Ricky was just in over his head thinking that, oh yeah, we're gonna beat all of these bars, we're gonna make the coolest bar ever. So I actually started the business with two other friends, and I knew them from like one of the partners. I didn't even know her. She was like a friend's friend, and I was like, you know what, let's just give it a go and let's just try this. And the reason for me kind of like going into this was because I thought to myself, if I truly want to be an entrepreneur, I have to start taking small risk. And at that point, I think we didn't have to put in too much money to build the bar and to kind of like start it up. It was we just buying a bar from someone else and we just kind of like fixing it up and trying to run it. So that's what we did. We just put a bit of money. I thought, like it's a money that I'm able to lose. Again, like it was some money that I scrounge up from like my days working as a barista at Starbucks over the weekend and in the evenings after my uni classes. And yeah, like it didn't go well mainly because we didn't know how to market, we didn't know how to differentiate ourselves, and we didn't know how to, like basically run a business, right? So one of the things that was super challenging for me during that time was managing my partner, this partner that I didn't know, who was giving out free drinks to all of our friends. And well, I mean, I was guilty a bit to that point as well, because I was giving some free drinks to my friend as well. Like as a bar owner, you're like a uni kid, like, this is Australia. People just, go there and have fun. Even like all the foreign students go there and like they'll go out and drink, right? And, enjoy their time, right? So, and we're all students, like that's our clientele. And like, we cannot charge a lot for our drinks. And now we're giving away free drinks, right? So yeah, it did not end very well after that. I think I exited after about 6 months, 7 months. Luckily, I didn't lose too much money, so I got my capital back. But I remember the partner that I didn't know, because he kept running the business, and eventually, they had to file for bankruptcy as well. Yeah. So yeah, that was my very first official venture.
Oh, wow, that is Ricky. If we need to catch dinner again sometime, because I want to go deeper into like what you're tracing superheroes for 5 cents. I mean, I gotta say that was a pretty good deal, actually. I mean, I think for both sides, actually, right? I mean, you get 5 cents, yeah.
Yeah, this was 1997, right? So like that was a lot of money for a kid in Indonesia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. 5 cents is it's a good price. I gotta say, you could do quite a bit with it. Amazing. I just love the idea, and then yeah, it's amazing. I want to see that made into a movie where you trace. It's like the movie of Ricky Willianto, right? It was like obviously the first scene is you. I don't know. On your deathbed, saying like Rosebud, and then the next image is you tracing, flashback.
A flashback, a huge flashback of me with my tracing paper, conning my secondary, my junior, primary school friends.
No, lah, it wasn't conning. I mean, it's a fair transaction. 5 cents is a fair transaction.
Yeah, I create value for them.
Yeah, exactly, it's value creation right there. And then, I loved also what you shared about, kind of like growing up, your air purifier story. That's amazing as well. Well, it's a good workout, I guess, too. Did you have to carry it door to door?
Yeah, I had no money to kind of like even get taxis, man. I was 16.
So you walk up to the door and you were carrying an air purifier on your back.
Yes, it wasn't. So the air purifier is okay. You've watched that movie, but with Will Smith, right? Pursuit of Happiness, where he's carrying this copier machine. It's literally that. That was me, but I wasn't like suited up. I was like this kid in his like shorts and trying to sell air purifier. Like I don't even know what it does. I don't even know why people need air purifier. I was just like trying to learn how to sell, right? So I literally had to kind of like carry that thing like for hours every day just to get my first customer. That was what I did. Yeah.
Okay, you gotta tell me, who was that first customer? Like your first and only customer who bought your one air purifier across 3 months. They gave you $500. You gotta tell. Do you remember this person? The face, the.
She gave me $5,000. The commission was $500, right? And like, okay, so she was. I remember again that my very first conversation when I closed that deal, I was so happy. I don't know what it was exactly, but it was one of the shop houses, that I walked to, and it's actually an office. It wasn't like a house. So I just went into the office and I was like, oh, like, can I speak to the manager? And like this lady came out. I can't remember her name now, but she actually runs. It was a design agency, and what they do, I think they do interior design stuff. And I was just pitching her like really hard on this, like why you need air purifier, because like the air you breathe is like 90% of the reason why you're healthy or unhealthy, right? Things like that, like basically what I was given as a script to sell this thing, right? It was like I don't know if it even works. It was like some air ionizing like technology that's meant to kind of like create positive charge and take all the free radicals from your body as you breathe the air. Anyway, she was really, really nice. She was like, look, Ricky, like, I don't think I need this, but like, you've been talking for like an hour and you're not letting me go back to work. I'll take a chance, but promise me one thing, right? That you're going to come back and you're going to leave your number. And if there's anything wrong with this product, and if there is anything that I'm unhappy with, you're going to come back and you're going to help me sort it out. And if I'm not happy with this, you're going to give me a refund, right? So I was like, yeah. And remember, I was a kid who knew that I was going to only do this for like 2 or 3 months. But I was like so keen on closing that deal. I was like, yeah. We're definitely gonna do that and support you and make sure that you have all the if you're not happy with it, you have like that risk-free element, the money back guarantee. I'll take care of that for you, right? And that's how I closed my first deal. She agreed, she's happy with it. And she actually never called me after that. She was just, I think she's happy with it. So yeah, that was the end of it. Yeah.
I want to know who she is and interview her and see if she remembers you.
Why did she buy this thing from this random kid, right?
You'll be like, why did you decide to trust $5,000 on
Yeah, it was $5,000, man. Like it was 2006, I think. Oh my goodness, that was a lot of money.
That's a lot of money for an air purifier. Yeah, this is absolutely insane. Well, I'm so glad that she took the bet on you and I don't know, kickstarted made it $5,000 to
buy an air purifier and transform a kid's life. That's not too bad if you put it that way. Maybe she was in her heart, she was like feeling, she took pity on you and she was like, yeah.
I would attribute it more to my salesman skills, but you know what? Fine, I'll take that as well, Jeremy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, clearly you were such an excellent salesperson. You were at the peak of your sales game, and you've never plateaued. You're just as good as you were. Exactly.
It just keeps getting better from there.
Oh yeah. So, and then talking about the bar, right? The bar one is an interesting story, right? Because I think first one, obviously you're selling one thing, then your second one you're selling for someone else, and the third one is where you became like a co-owner, right? What's it like? I mean, was that an interesting transition? Like when you walked into, tell me when you first walked into that building, the room, right? It wasn't transformed yet and everything. What was your perception of the place?
Well, man, like that building now that I'm looking back and thinking back, it was terrible. I don't know what I was thinking. It was run down, like everything was broken. It was so dirty. And we didn't know like the first thing about running an F&B business, right? Well, my partner does in Melbourne. He does kind of like he was a chef, I think, at that point. So he knew like how to kind of like, make sure that you meet all the requirements, you get all the licenses, food and beverage licenses, stuff like that. So he knew how to do that. But I didn't know anything, right? And just kind of like in for the ride, and he was like taking care of everything. So I think when the first time we went in, it was just run down. Like we had to fix everything manually, like one by one, the three of us. I think every weekend I'll be there, like trying to patch the floor, trying to like clean and the kitchen was like disgusting. The bar was disgusting. The fridge was, oh my god, like it was just horrible, right? So I was just kind of like doing a lot of those things. And as a uni kid, again, we didn't have a lot of capital to do renovations. So I literally just kind of like put up like posters that I print out on like my home printer as like the menu, and we were like using Word and designing random stuff and putting it up as like a sign saying that we're open. Like it was just, everything was just kind of like a mishmash of like scrawly handwriting on a piece of paper, or like a really cheaply printed like flyer, right? That was literally the first day of that company, that business. That bar is called Little Peninsula. It's gone now, but it's called Little Peninsula. Yeah.
Wow, I can't imagine that happening. And so you were patching and you're renovating the place by hand, putting on the flyers. So tell us about your first day of the bar.
Okay, so this is the other thing that is definitely a mistake, and I would highly recommend anyone who's listening who wants to be an entrepreneur not do, which is I left everything to my partner to do, right? So I did not even I think I ran a few shifts there as a bartender. I was a terrible bartender, but I was running a few shifts, again, like because I give free drinks and stuff, people like it, but like from a business perspective, it was terrible. But like I think I remember like doing running the business, and we hired a few waiters and bartenders. I remember thinking like these people are actually earning much more than like what I'm making, and like I had to pay. And this is Australia, right? So I think we were paying them like $21 every hour for the work they do, and I was paying myself zero. We were like in the red in the first few months, right? So we didn't make any money. So I remember thinking, shit, what did I get myself into? Every single hour I work at Starbucks, and by the way, when I was working at Starbucks, I was making like $15-16, right? So these people I'm hiring are making more money than me, and like that was something that I remember. I was like, shit, like did I make a mistake? Does this make sense? I better make this work, right? So that crossed my mind so many times. And I think I remember the first 3 or 4 months of us building that business, we didn't have like any customers, man. Like we did not have anyone coming. No one knows who we are. I have to drag my friends. My partners have to drag their friends, and people from uni, whoever that wants a drink, we just tell them we're gonna give you free drink. Just come and at least enjoy the one free drink and see. We're kind of like crossing our fingers, thinking like, okay, maybe they'll buy like the next drink. And that was kind of like the early days. What was it again? There was a couple of like quite interesting things that happened in that bar. We had a lot of arguments within the partners about like how we want to run the business. So I think because it was a bar business, but it's kind of like a very nicely located building, it was actually right in the middle of the CBD of Melbourne. We were thinking of like turning it into like a cafe in the middle of the day. So like I was actually like running a few shifts as well as waiters during that time, just kind of like serving like random stuff. Like my friend would cook like Indonesian like don with like fried chicken on top. It was just like completely random like menu that like doesn't sit together with the concept of Little Peninsula and the place being a bar. Like just a mess, man. Like it was, oh man, like I don't know, like I don't know what we were doing, honestly. Like it was just insane. Yeah.
Wow. And no, I think that's interesting, right? Because those seem to be like three very formative experiences, obviously being part of a business and running a business. It's kind of curious. So, and then you've obviously each time around, you've also been clear to articulate what you learned from each stage, right? Yeah. I'm just kind of curious. So that's when you started joining your professional career, right? Tell us more about, like your jobs, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah. So the first job, I guess, professional job that I got was with this company called IBisWorld in Australia. I was a research analyst, and I got a job through a friend. Again, like in Australia, it was really hard for a new grad at that point to kind of like find a new job. And I was actually not very smart as well because I studied like finance and economics, and those are the things that will not give you a PR in Australia. And if you don't have a PR in Australia, it's almost impossible to get a job, right? So I had to kind of like rely on curry favors with some friends, and yeah, I got that job. That was, I think, a super interesting job because it was $100 million business, and they literally only had 60 people working. So revenue per employee was insanely high, right? And at the same time, I remember my first paycheck was, I think it was $28,000 a year, so it's like $2,000 plus after taxes, every single month. And in Australia, that is like I make more money being a barista. So like that was like nothing. But what I realized was that they were not very worried. The managers, the CEOs, they're not worried about like hiring all these undergrads, young professionals who basically, cost really cheap, cost really low to hire. And like their business model is about, getting all this research done very, very quickly, write it in a very nice template, present it in a very with like really nice graph and illustrations, and sell it for like thousands and thousands of dollars, right? So like the accounts will be with like the bank in Australia, like Commonwealth Bank or NAB or ANZ, and these banks will pay IBisWorld like hundreds of thousands of dollars to access the reports that is written by a bunch of undergrad, right? So out of the 60 people that's working full time for them, I think there was only like 20 analysts, and then I think there was like 10 ops people, and there were 10 sales people. Like it was just like analysts who just got out of uni, who's producing all this forecasts about an industry, who's talking about who are the competitors that you should look out for, who's talking about challenges and opportunities in like the construction industry. Like, we know nothing. We just read everything online, and we were calling people up from like these companies, asking them like, oh, like what are some of the like what's your revenue this year? How much money are you making? Like, we're trying to like put the picture of this industry together, but we're just a bunch of really young kids who have no experience doing that. And I think that at that point, what I realized was it was a good business model, right? And I think I kept thinking as an entrepreneur, right? I was thinking like, oh, I need to build a business that has to grow the people, like has to be very fancy. You have to have like amazing engineers that, like can go on and work for Google, things like that. But I think IBisWorld taught me that there are a lot of different ways you can run a business. And I think they're not caught up with like trying to make it like the best place to work. They just focus on making it a profitable and a growing business. And it worked really well. And like, look, all these undergrads that's working there, they only work for like 1 or 2 years, right? They don't care about retention because to them, like, there's a lot more undergrad who needs jobs that pays $2,000 a month. So if you want to leave, feel free to leave. They've got all the systems set up, so there's no one who's going to become like a knowledge hog who knows like how to run the entire business, and when they leave, become irreplaceable, right? Like there's no one person that is kind of like like a bottleneck in that sense. Yeah, they just kind of like go through like undergrad students like every single month, right? They don't care, and that's their business model, and they embrace it, they accept it as their business. And I think that's kind of like one of the things that I realized is a way to build a business. You don't have to build a business that retain people for 20 years, 30 years, and kind of like help them build a full career out of it. So that was IBisWorld.
Tell us more about Ravenry and what you're building today and how you got started.
We started Ravenry on the back of the idea that we want to build a knowledge work platform that is on demand and flexible. I think it was about 4 years ago when we started, and we had this idea looking at Grab, looking at Gojek, allowing people to kind of like make a living, driving, and basically kind of become a ride-hailing driver, right? And we thought, why not empower people to do things that are like more knowledge based. There's a lot of people in Singapore and in Southeast Asia who are really smart, right? Who kind of like are engineers, who are like analysts, and who's able to kind of like provide like a lot of this knowledge services online. So why not kind of like make that more accessible to people? So that's kind of like the initial idea for Ravenry. When we started, we thought that it'd be nice to kind of like make money right away. So I remember like my first revenue, we actually sent email to a bunch of my friends in like different VCs and different companies and just say, hey, if you pay me $100, I'll answer any questions you have about your business, about the market. I'll do some research for you in 24 hours, right? So that's kind of like how we made our first $100. I think it was 1 month into the idea, basically, just to test it out and see how it works. And I think from there, initially we thought, okay, we need to raise fund for this, right? Because, okay, like a lot of people are interested in it. There is some traction. We have a lot of people who's kind of like coming back to us. And so we tried to kind of like raise fund. And I think we got turned down a lot. I think it was kind of like a 1-year journey of us just trying, because we thought that, oh, this must be the way to go, right? Like everyone's kind of like raising fund. You read like, any tech media in Singapore and globally, it's all about like who's closed what round, right? And at what, like how many millions, right? So we thought that's the way to go. I think after 1 year, we thought, we kind of realized that a lot of the investors were interested, but they always tried to kind of like get us to change something, get us to, change our valuation, ask us why we are doing this, what's the purpose of this, is there a market for this? There's a lot of this stakeholder management thing that we have to do that we didn't actually set out to do when we started this business. We really wanted to just build a product that works for, like the knowledge, ecosystem, knowledge work ecosystem, right? So we thought, why not just bootstrap it? We have revenue anyway. We're making enough money to cover like our expenses. We at that point, we had like 3 full-timers working for us, and we're able to kind of like, be profitable even with just us bootstrapping and not like taking an external capital. So we actually completely fine, right? And I think as I've mentioned, that's kind of like how a lot of people started their, that's kind of like how a lot of people built their business, right? Like their business are profitable. A lot of these SMEs are doing really well. They're fine. They don't need any like, capital injection, and they're doing just fine. So we thought, okay, why don't we just bootstrap it? And that's kind of like how we got to this point 3.5 years later.
Awesome. So what's interesting is your brutal honesty about the fact that you actually did try to seek VC funding, and then you ended up bootstrapping the business. So, firstly, most founders who bootstrap, sometimes it's a bit of aura, which is we intellectually chose bootstrapping first, and we never went to do VC funding. And I think the converse is also true. I think a lot of people who go for VC funding never really talk about bootstrapping or never really thought of bootstrapping as an option. So I think that's a good thing about it. What is your experience been of bootstrapping so far versus what you see of VC funding now that you're some years into it?
For me, I think bootstrapping is just another way of building a business, right? I never kind of like, I would never say to anyone, do not actually seek external funding, do not talk to VCs. I wouldn't say that to people as kind of like a blanket rule. I think for me, bootstrapping is just a great way for me to retain a lot of my freedom, a lot of my, I guess, genuine vision of what I want to do with the business. And it gives me a lot more, I guess, time to focus on what I really love to do, which is why I started my own business, right? Which is product building. I want to create impact to all this, freelance knowledge workers. I want to build a team. I enjoy that a lot. I want to spend more time doing that. And when I look at, my friends who kind of like are going through a lot of these VC funding rounds, I think this is something that they kind of like, they knew they're going to get themselves into, so they were prepared mentally. But it does take a toll, right? It takes them easily like 3 to 6 months to close a round. And that is essentially 3 to 6 months of them not like doing what they set out to do in the first place, not doing what they actually love doing, right? So for me, it was a trade-off that I was willing to make, not having so much capital to be able to pour into this engine and skyrocket the growth. But instead, I get some time to actually build what I love and actually do things that matter to me.
What would you say are the downsides of bootstrapping?
It's definitely challenging. I mean, like, just generally entrepreneurship is just challenging, right? But I think bootstrapping kind of like puts you into that mindset of constraint a lot of the time, right? Like the biggest challenge for us is always like knowing how exactly we want to like use whatever is left, like, at the end of the month, right? in our bank account, right? So thinking about like very carefully, okay, do we hire with this money? Is it better if we put it in marketing? Is it better if we, like build a new team in a different country? A lot of that decision becomes more and more important it cannot be like, decided frivolously because that's all we have, right? I think that's kind of like one of the biggest challenges. I think as a founder, I think the other challenge that I face very early on is just a sense of envy looking at like all these really well-funded startups, either like our direct competitor or just like startups in any other domain, and even like our own friends, right? Just looking at them and seeing how like, oh, like it's so nice they're able to hire like the top developers in Singapore. It's so nice they're able to kind of like get like this swanky office and give like their employees all the nicest, MacBook Pros, and that is something that I always feel very challenging, I think personally, to deal with, because I always want to do what's best for my employee, right? I think that's kind of like one of the most important things for me. And it's always hard to kind of like tell them that, hey guys, like this is what we made at the end of the month. And like, I know you guys are looking for a raise. I know like we need this new laptop, that new, desk for whatever reason, right? But can we wait for another 2 months? And that's kind of like one of the most challenging things that I feel like we have to sacrifice as a team.
Yeah, I think the envy is real, right? For any business, which is 99% of businesses are real businesses that are not VC funded. And the envy is real because, the media, like you said, is showing them off. And we have so many friends and peers who are not only founders, but also are employees and operators within those companies, right? Have you ever had founders ever say they envy you bootstrapping the business?
Not really, not many actually. I think a lot of people probably will say things like, "Wow, I don't know how you're able to do this. I don't know how you're able to have like 10 full timers, 11 full timers, like and not raise an EVC round, and you are building a tech product." I think a lot of people kind of like express that. I don't think anyone's come to me and say, "I wish I was you." So that's something that I have yet to hear. So we'll see.
Yeah, the truth is, no one is envious of you as long as the fundraising train keeps going, right? It's when it stops, and I think that's when founders are going to be like, "Whoa, I wish I had bootstrapped that, etc." In fact, I actually just recently rolled off a call with another founder who was very explicitly bootstrapping because his first company had failed to scale with the VC capital infusion, right? And in retrospect, it was not the right time and the right place to do that and attempt a hockey stick growth path.
I do have to say, I think there are times when I'm really grateful to have bootstrapped, especially last year during COVID. I think a lot of people are very reliant on, external funding. They're burning a lot of cash before, COVID hit. And I think when COVID hit, all the demand's gone, right? So all of a sudden, like they just have to pay all these expenses without seeing any upside. A lot of the VC are very cautious in terms of pouring money into these companies. They are not able to show like that growth, that traction during this period, and that hurt them a lot. And a lot of them actually went out of business because they were too reliant on a lot of these, VC funds. Having said that, there are also obviously some that has like a really nice, treasure chest, right, that allows them to go through that, without having to worry too much, without even like sweating a beat. I think, but for me, I was really grateful that we had like a profitable business. We had enough cash reserve to be able to weather through like, completely like, unexpected, situation like that, and not having to even ask anyone to basically bail us out, right? I think that was kind of like a really nice feeling, knowing that, we were able to do that ourselves. And also like there's this sense of confidence that a lot of the money that we get are from customers, right? And oftentimes I think, that is the best kind of money, because that shows that your product is working. That shows that, people are, seeing value, getting value from your product. And I think there's no strings attached, right? Because all you need to do is that it's a very clear promise, right? You promise that you're going to deliver this value, and you do that, and you get money in return, right? There's no like, oh, like if for the next round of, fundraising, you got to do this for me. You got to put a board member. You got to let me make decision now. Like there's no such thing, which kind of like is something that I really enjoy.
Yeah, Ricky, that's a really undervalued part about bootstrapping is your ability to weather the ups and in a much more flat way. So a lot of equanimity in the entire process versus the roller coaster that founders normally have, right? Which is they have to push for a very positive case on the business fundamentals, and they also have to stack and push for a very positive probability of the fundraise associated with those fundamentals. Those two things are roughly correlated. As long as you're building a good business, there should be some funding, but it's not a perfect correlation. And I think that's a lot of stress. So I think you get to sleep a little bit better at night, especially at times when those two probabilities and outcomes are becoming less correlated for example, in the crisis of COVID. When you think about the piece about fundraising and bootstrapping, what advice do you give to people who are come up to you and say, "Hey, I'm interested in bootstrapping my next company"?
Okay, this is a tough one. I think for me, fundamentally, business building, if you're to build a real business, in my opinion, I think you want to focus on both the top line and the bottom line, right? So I think for me, bootstrapping is not something that should just be for bootstrappers. It should be something for everyone. All entrepreneurs should understand like the basic fundamental of creating value using a corporation in a business, right? So I wouldn't say that this is specific to any bootstrapper. But I would say I think one of the things that I learned as a someone who haven't really got a lot of capital injection is to kind of like see constraint as a way to kind of be creative and come up with interesting solutions. With Ravenry, for example, I think we've gone through so many different iterations of our business. Partly is because we kind of like figured out like there's no product market fit for certain versions of the product. I think the other reason is also we need to make money, right? And I think the nice thing about like focusing on like thinking very quickly about how we can make money and how we can actually have like profit at the end of the month to pay everyone, right, is you actually are thinking very hard how you can generate value right away for your company. I think a lot of startups that I see nowadays are very focused on like getting users, getting traction, but that do not necessarily translate to a good business model right away. And I think thinking about your business model really, really early on is very important, especially if you're a bootstrapper. And sometimes I think do not kind of like be daunted by the fact that sometimes you have to build business that is very manual, maybe like a service business, maybe a consulting business, right, as part of your way to fund your project, your idea, right? I think do not kind of like look at that as a weakness or as a disadvantage. I actually see that as a strength because usually that kind of project allows you to really have like a much deeper relationship with the customer, really get down and dirty into like what problems they face, because you are like providing them a service, right? So exactly like, oh, this is the biggest pain point they go through, this is their user journey, right? This is the kind of things they have to deal with, these are their challenges, right? And from there, oftentimes, like we get so many new insights that really, really help us in building our product, right? So that's the other thing that I would advise. Don't shy away from providing services and doing things that seems manual and not scalable. Embrace it and really use that as a way to get new insights about your customers.
You're reminding me about how VC funded startups find the medium term easy in terms of spending and getting growth through a certain set of dimensions like users, yet can find themselves with a range of positive to failure outcomes in the long term. Long term being a year to 24 months. And you have to go through as a bootstrapper really a lot of short term pain on the top line and the bottom line perspective, and then you kind of have a much clearer outcomes, more straightforward set of outcomes from the medium term to long term. What resources would you recommend for people who are thinking about bootstrapping? So other than listening to this podcast with you sharing advice.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of companies out there that's kind of like doing great as company that bootstrap. I wouldn't really kind of like say TopTal is like the go-to example, because they've done they did some like really questionable things to their early stage angel investors, but they've kind of like done really well in terms of being able to build a business that is like I think a few $100 million revenue a year. So that's kind of like an amazing company case study to look at. If you look at Basecamp, I think the founder Jason Fried and DHH, both of them are always posting a lot of resources, whether through their blog or on Twitter. They publish a few books as well on how they've done it. Again, like they started as an agency business and then they kind of like built a product out of it. And now today, 50 people, remote team, I think like a few, like I think like tens of millions of dollars in revenue and are doing really well. So look at these, some of these founders as I think a source of inspiration and also learning, because they are usually very open in terms of sharing their experience. I also follow this company called Earnest Capital. It's actually a VC fund, if you will, but they are focusing on slow and calm companies, right? So their belief is that they are basically trying to encourage more companies to focus on building a business that is sustainable in the long term, financially, environmentally, etc. Right? So I think they also have a lot of best practices. They publish a lot of blog posts about how the founder in their portfolio companies have done it and have been really, really successful. Yeah, and I think take a look at them. They also run a few events. They have a really amazing Slack group that I'm part of. So these are just some of the resources that I use on a day-to-day basis.
That reminded me about Sahil and Gumroad. And do you remember the story about how they used to be a VC startup and then they slashed their way all the way back to being bootstrapped? And then this year, recently, I think a month ago, they raised a ton of money via crowdfunding. I think $5 million, which is a form of capital that acts quasi like angel / VC capital. So it's interesting because you're reminding me about how it's also a two-way street, right? Well, I think it's easier to go from bootstrapped. There's lots of companies that bootstrap and then eventually raise VC funding. It's pretty hard to do it the other way around. It's very hard to be on a VC trajectory and slashing your way down to a bootstrap set of outcomes.
I don't know how you're able to buy out all your investors at that stage, to be honest with you.
Well, I think it's because your investors, abandon you. So for a lot of them, right? So it's not as if you're like cutting them loose. It's like they cut you loose anyway. So
that's a different situation. Yeah. I think there's also another resource that I forgot to mention, which is Indie Hacker. I think there's a lot of quote unquote maker creators there that are trying to just get the first year of their business, they're just trying to get to like 5K MRR. And if we go to Indie Hacker, you'll see the crazy things they do to get to 5K MRR. And I think a lot of it is super inspiring. So definitely take a look at that if you want to bootstrap.
It feels like there's a lot of people talking about bootstrapping over the past 1 year. Do you feel like it's overhyped, or do you feel like it needs to be hyped up more for bootstrapping?
I think it's really very underrepresented, right, in the media. No one talks about this, and that's kind of for me is the annoying part because I did not know this option was available. I mean, it's so strange, right? Because all the businesses I know since I was growing up are basically profitable businesses, right? They're not really VC funded. My dad has his own business. It wasn't VC funded and he was doing fine, right? So it's so funny that we never think about them as a viable way to build a business and a startup, right? I think whenever people associate tech and startup and put that together, it almost always means you need VC funding, which I am starting to think now that I've been doing this for 3 years plus, I'm starting to think that it's highly viable to use bootstrapping as a way to do that. So I'm all for hyping this up even more. And I think the only way this can happen is if the bootstrappers actually talk about it, right? The difference is a lot of these media companies and a lot of these VC funded startups, obviously they want to make the media because they want to tell it's a signaling tool, right? They want to tell all the other VCs that, hey, look, we just got $2 million. You missed out on this, right? Get ready for the next round, right? I think there is a lot of that kind of makes the media so saturated with funding news. Whereas bootstrappers don't do that. They're a lot more realistic with how they use their money, right? So they're a lot more they're just more focused on building their business. So they don't really market themselves as much, talk about their process as much, right? So I wish that there's a lot more bootstrappers that are talking about it and just make it a very good option, right? Make it an available option for all the other startup founders who's kind of starting on their journey, and show them that there's a way to do it without having you to start your journey with fundraising. You can do that. You can always do that later, right? But you don't have to start your first 3 to 6 months pitching ideas, right? Instead, you can just focus on building it and getting that product market fit early.
Awesome. I agree. We need to hype up bootstrapping again, which is the normal unprocessed food diet of the startup building. Last question here is, where were you 10 years ago, and what advice would you go back to give to yourself if you were traveling back in time?
10 years ago, that was 2011. What was I doing? I think I was in university starting up, my first job. I would actually get myself to experiment with things a lot more. I think I was too scared to try new things, to make a mistake, to fail, right? I think especially out of uni, and at that time I was in Australia, so I was so focused on trying to get a job that will give me a PR in Australia. In the end, I didn't even get a PR, and I actually after a few years, I thought that Australia wasn't a place that will support what I want to do. So I thought actually it works out fine anyway. But I was like so focused on like just succeeding and not making any mistakes. What happened was I think I missed out on a lot of like really interesting opportunities that I could have learned a lot from. And yeah, definitely like I would have told myself to just experiment more, don't be afraid about failure, and yeah, just kind of like, do more fun things that I care about rather than like what the conventional success definition is.
Awesome. So true. Thanks so much, Ricky.
Thanks, Jeremy.